Welcome back to the Creating Distance podcast hosted by TA Sales. I'm your host, Tom Alaimo. Some people call me Tommy Tahoe. And each week on Fridays, we'll be bringing you an episode to break down with salespeople and sales leaders the top tips, tactics, strategies, stories that you need to get to the next level of your career and up-level yourself. So let's get into it.
All right, welcome back to the Creating Distance podcast. I'm your host, Tom Alaimo. I want to set the stage for this episode. We're going to do a solo pod. We're in Denver last week. There were 200 plus CROs from B2B tech and from across the country, even across the world, that all got together. And they all have one question, which is, how do we sell in a market where the goalposts keep getting changed every single day? Right. So there's a few things that we're going to talk about in this episode. We're going to do a review of the entire summit. We're going to talk about why people think that the full cycle sales rep is back. We're going to get into the morphing of pricing, going from seats to outcomes. And really the number one question on everyone's mind is, what does an AI native go-to-market motion really look like? So, here are my personal takeaways from the show. I thought it was outstanding. This is not in any way affiliated to Pavilion, although I have been a happy member for over 5 years. There's no sort of sponsorship or anything going on from that standpoint. So I think there's a few pieces that I want to kick off with to help kind of like frame data around what's going on in the marketplace right now. So a few things that they brought up in terms of like how do we set the stage of what's going on right now. Number one, buyers were surveyed prior to this, and 61% said they preferred a rep-free process, which is pretty interesting. We're seeing obviously cold outreach responses go down. They said even by 30%. There's more involvement from the CFO. There's buyer hesitancy with, market volatility and the like. And, one thing that I thought was interesting was they surveyed CROs. This actually comes from Gartner's Chief Sales Officer report around like, what does the normal work week look like for a CRO between long-range planning and firefighting? And the outcome of that was that 80% of the time spent, so about 7 times more spent on firefighting and short-term initiatives than long-range planning and strategy. We all know the facts that CROs are the shortest tenured title within the C-suite. Right now it's about 25 months, coming from Harvard Business Review. So all of these factors, I think, that's really how they framed the event and what's going on in the market right now. And, to me, that makes this job as a CRO as hard or harder than it's ever been. We're obviously past the growth at all costs, ZERP era, and now we need to get into what does profitable, efficient growth look like. That is a concept that they talk about quite a bit at Pavilion. We see on LinkedIn, we see, people like Sam Jacobs, like Jason Lemkin, and others talk about. So, there were a few ideas that, I thought were interesting, and the CRO mandate that they put in place from Pavilion as the end of kind of their keynote was, calling it the Chief Adaptability Officer, right? And knowing that you need to continue to adapt to what the market's saying. So that could be in response to things that are going on globally, with tariffs and the like. That could be in response to what does AI do for our business from a product standpoint? What does that do for our team as a productivity standpoint? I'm starting to see from my lens of working with teams that, the old model of, hey, if we want to grow, if we want to double revenue, let's just double the sales team. Those days, there are a few clients that are still, operating under that mindset and are still receiving tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in funding and can run that play. But for the majority, for the 80%, the funding has dried up quite a bit. And they need to find more profitable, efficient ways of going about it. And so what does that look like? It looks like maybe instead of going from 10 to 20 reps to double, maybe it's keeping it at 10 and increasing two levers, increasing the skill lever of your reps. So how do you get turn your 10 reps that have an average of a B minus, and how do you turn them into a B plus average? I don't know if we're going to get 10 A player reps all on one org, and that's the org. That's maybe not realistic. But how do we increase the skill set, and how do we enable them to do more with that skill set? There's very widely used data that says that sellers spend about 30 to 40% of their time at most actually selling, talking with customers or prospects. So, there are ways, and I'm happy to share, maybe even on this pod, some ideas around what that looks like. Maybe just to riff on that for a second, I think, where I would look and where I think the smartest sales leaders and reps are looking is first step, like what are the repetitive tasks that I do every day? What takes up that 60 to 70% that I can either eliminate or I could outsource to AI? So to me, the most common things that stand in the way of an SDR or an AE, for example, that keeps them off of the phone and keeps them off of Zoom and not in front of customers is one, internal meetings. So one might question how often we need to have those. One might question, do they need to be 30 minutes? Do they need to be an hour? Do they need to be mandatory? I think, a key deal review, probably mandatory. Pipeline review, one-on-ones, but all the other team meetings, maybe not. The other percent of time that eats up a lot is, doing some of these manual repetitive tasks. For SDRs, they're doing account research. They're adding contacts to their sales engagement platform, like an Outreach or SalesLoft or whatever they're using. They're finding the right contact data. They're going into Zoom Info or whatever they might be using. And I'm just naming some providers that are most common to whoever's listening to this. And they're going through those steps. So a lot of their 2/3 of their time is finding Tom on LinkedIn, adding him into Outreach, going to make sure we've got the right contact info in Zoom Info, find the number, make the call. So I think there's a lot of technology that we can use to help supplant that, whether you need to buy it or you can even build it using some pieces within AI that might be at your grasp with, at $20 a month with the paid version or the plus version of ChatGPT. So those are the types of solutions that I'm talking about for the seller. What takes up a lot of time? Account research, automate that in AI. Call follow-up. I've built an LLM that, I could put a transcript into the call. Hopefully you're recording all of your calls. You take the transcript. It automatically writes a 90% follow-up email. You might want to put your own flavor or spin on it or add some links or, other materials that only you have, but it's doing the majority of the work for you in that case. You can set reminders. You can set, pings to go back out throughout the sales process. You can use it to create decks. Within Canva, or I've heard good things about Gamma as an AI slide creator. So some of these things that generally take quite a bit of time, you can go in as a sales leader, as a frontline leader. Another thing that I've been working on with a team is building out a call scoring bot within ChatGPT. So training the algorithm on what good looks like, what leads to closed won opportunities, what leads to closed lost, what are those key, 3 or 4 things that stand out in each process. How can we train AI to read a call and tell us how we did and tell us what the gaps might be in that deal? So you could be doing that as a frontline leader. Of course, there are tools if you have the budget or if you have the resources to use that. But I think that is the mindset, is not the instinct used to be, we need to grow, let's bring in a person. And when we think about leverage, the human capital leverage is linear, right? One extra body takes you in the exact same place linearly. The way to be able to do it exponentially is to find some sort of technology to be able to help with that. So that is where the mindset goes. That's where my own mindset goes in terms of where we can take it from here and what I'm even thinking about in my own business. So I want to get back to the conversation and back to the summit. A few sessions. I'm not going to talk about every single session because I want to keep this time box from an episode perspective. If you have questions, you can hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll answer, and we can jam out on any of this type of stuff. But there are a few sessions that I'll talk about. One of them was with the CEO of Hootsuite, and she came on stage, and really the conversation was about the Gen Z buyer and how they prefer to buy. And a few of the interesting takes that I got, obviously, I think we could come up with some hypotheses that they want to engage on social. Most of them, from a Gen Z or even a millennial perspective, they would prefer a text over a call. They would prefer a DM or even over a text. They start their search for a process typically on a social channel versus on Google. And so there was a lot to be taken in around how do we reach that buyer. And I think one thing that's interesting is, the three kind of takeaways in terms of that I got from her on how we can reach that buyer. Number one is being able to dominate in the research phase, right? So the Gen Z is typically doing the SDR's job of doing some of that preliminary research. They're showing up more prepared to a buying conversation. And so how do we show a solid brand presence? How do we have visibility on social? If you are selling B2B and your CEO is not posted on LinkedIn, that's a huge miss. If your sales leader is not posted on LinkedIn, that is a huge miss. If you're selling to buyers that are on other platforms, I have, in my world, LinkedIn is the prominent social channel, but I've worked with teams that, go hard in Facebook groups. I've seen ones that go hard in X, that go hard in Reddit, that go hard in Instagram. So the key is not, everyone should be on LinkedIn, but I do think it should be obvious at this point that we need to be spending more time and energy on social, and being able to see where, that leads to. The second thing that she said that I got as a takeaway was that Gen Z demands to have an on-demand buying experience. And rather than it being the typical flow of, hey, everyone's going to come through, you talk to a sales rep, you get a demo 3 days later after doing some discovery. That might be the process for some of us, and that might still be the right way to do it. An alternative path or a supplement to that would be to have some sort of a user-friendly platform that lets buyers go at their own pace. So what does that look like? That could look like a demo that's ready to go on your website. It could be as simple as that. It could be an AI chatbot that you have on your site that is having a back and forth with a prospect, helping them to answer questions so that they can show up. One, they might qualify or disqualify themselves in that process, but they might even get closer to a sale without any human intervention. So for me in my business, I'm starting to think about what does that look like? Is it an AI conversation bot that we can have on the site? Is it some more free training or something like that people can go through so that they can get a taste of what we do before they actually decide that they want to buy, because we don't do, we don't have a software that we're demoing. And the last piece that we talked about, or that she mentioned as one of the key takeaways, was being even more visible on social. They did some gong mentions for how often her CEO brand was mentioned within deals, and I think it was 5 or 10x in Q1 of this year compared to any quarter of last year. And so that was just based on the dedicated effort that she put in to that. And that would be a suggestion that I would have for folks is find a way to track some of these changes that you make. How many conversations are coming, even anecdotally, where they're mentioning LinkedIn? How many conversations are coming where they mentioned the demo video that you put ungated on your site that was easy for them to scroll through? How can you get a feel for where people are in their buyer's journey? Because 80% of it happens before they're even talking to you. So great session from her. A bunch of other things that came up, but I want to move to my next point, my next takeaway, which is with Jocko Vanderkoop from Winning by Design. I hope I said his name correctly. Always brings a lot of passion and always brings a lot of just great insights. And I think the one key takeaway that I got from him was the idea of, there was really been 3 playbooks to go to market that are tried and true. The first playbook is acquisition, right? We got this from the kind of like repeatable model that was built at Salesforce, where you have SDRs, creating pipe for AEs that go and close a deal throughout their deal cycle, and it's tried and true, but it also scales linearly based on sales reps. Yes, we can automate. Yes, we could take some time out of the equation from how much time sellers spent actually selling, but there are limitations to that. And oftentimes it's quite an expensive way with high CAC to be able to acquire customers. The second playbook is retention. How do we retain our customers? Since COVID, this has been a more talked about channel where CS and account management orgs are really focusing more on NRR than they are on just top line revenue. So focusing on what does that experience look like to renew our customers and to treat them well and to make sure that we can, renew as many of them as we can. And then playbook number 3 is about expansion. So within our current customers, how do we cross-sell? How do we upsell? How do we get referrals? Things like that, right? That's where the account manager comes in. And the best organizations are not seeing the account management team as order takers and renewal specialists. They're seeing them as strategic reps that can find areas of opportunity to grow within their book of business. So those were the 3 playbooks that really got us to where we are today. Jocko suggests that there is a 4th playbook, which I think is pretty interesting, and he's calling it user-led growth. So when you think about all of the potential opportunity to break through with your customers, the acquisition model is all about net new. The retention and expansion is typically focused on who your champions, who your coaches, and who your economic buyers are. Now, in most organizations, the end user is not necessarily those coaches, champions, and economic buyers, right? It might be oftentimes the individual contributor that is using, say, Gong to have their sales calls recorded and might really like the technology. Or it might be someone at Canva who is actually creating the slide decks or marketing materials that's helping them do their job better. In my case, it's the sellers that we're training and coaching and helping to get better every single day. And we've trained over 2,000 people at this point across the globe. So the idea that he has is there's a lot of opportunity potentially within that user base. And, the math that he plays out is, hey, if even 1 out of 100 of those users are able to introduce you to someone and be leveraged as a referral, if you have thousands and thousands of customers, the numbers can play out on that, in a really large way. And so he only teased really at the how, but I do think that's an interesting idea that I'm starting to consider is how can we start being more connected to the sellers that we're training even after we go through training to find other opportunities, 1, to be able to help them, and then 2, for them, if they really loved what we did, to spread the word, to make an introduction. If we have 2,000 people that we've trained, and if his math stands correct, that 1 in 100 might make an intro, well, that's 20 potential intros for us. And if we're closing 20% of deals, that means 1 out of every 5. That means we have 4 brand new deals that come in, and that number can continue to scale and compound the more people that actually use your product or service. So I thought that was a pretty interesting take, and that's also something that I'm starting to think about. And I think the value in that I really appreciate is the compound nature of it, in that the cost of acquisition actually goes up for new business the higher and higher we get, because we've already skimmed the top off of like who the most likely buyers are and the first movers. Whereas in this case, the theory is that the cost of acquisition would remain flat or even go down as the results compound, because you're working with people that are potential raving fans and people that have already used the product or service and love it. And so it's a very interesting take. The last piece that I want to get into is some data that came from Guy Rubin, who's the CEO of EBSTA. And every year they put out a sales benchmark study. This is oftentimes where you might hear me talk about data around what percent of salespeople miss quota, what the average day of the CRO looks like, things like that. That's often coming from this data, which I think is really strong. So the headline is this: the state of go-to-market in 2025 versus 2024. There's a few things that, of what's changed between this year and last year. So in go-to-market, there's been a 10% lower win rate from this year compared to last year. That could be because of a lot of the factors that we mentioned before. CFOs more involved in deals, a lot more deal scrutiny, a lot less movement in the economy just based on people that are, a little scared, for lack of better terms, in terms of like how they're going to take their next step. There's a 54% increase, though, in the deal value. So fewer deals getting done, perhaps, but much larger deals being talked about. So that also checks out to me in that those two forces could be, on the opposite ends of the spectrum, where if there's a lot more scrutiny, your deal might not get done, but because it's getting done at a higher level and because there is so much scrutiny going into it, that someone might sign on for a bigger deal, or they might sign on for a small deal and then be willing to expand once you're able to prove it out. A few other data points: minus 9% in terms of sales cycle, which is not particularly surprising. There were 78% of sellers that are expected to miss quota this year. That is insane to me. So that means 22%. So just over 1 out of every 5 sellers are expected to hit their number. And the number given to them as, this is what your OTE is, this is how much money that you should make, this is you saying that you did your job well. If we're at this point where it's less than a quarter of reps are able to say that, that goes back to something's broken in the system. And so if that's what your org looks like, you could take it as, yes, you're not alone, great, losers love company. But the key that I would be taking from this is, what can we change? And that's where I think about, the quality in the systems. The other data point that coincides with this is that there was an 11x delta in sales velocity between top reps and bottom reps. So that's essentially a fancy equation that is saying how many deals multiplied by average deal value multiplied by win rate divided by the average sales cycle. So the layman's way of putting it is that top performers are generating 11 times more revenue per day compared to bottom performers. So what does that mean? That means your top rep might be doing $1 million and your bottom rep might be doing 100K. I think that is, when I think back to my experience, I think that checks out. That might not check out for a team that if you have 10 reps, everyone's there the entire year. You might not see that delta, but when you consider reps that don't make it, reps that get cut, that get riffed, that get put on pips, all of that probably plays into this. So I think that's where we're seeing that data. So this is what brings me back to the main point of 2 levers that we're playing with here, right? One is the quality of reps. So this is something that can easily be coached, trained, monitored. Again, this is something that we do every single day, is equip reps with the right skills. So you might have great product market fit, or you're finding that, but if your reps don't have the right skills to be able to build more pipe, to close more pipe, to be able to grow within their accounts, expand, close bigger deals, shorten the sales cycle, some of those key factors, that's where you get into linear pacing. That's where the only way to grow is to add more heads. So one, you need to ensure that the reps that you have before you bring on anyone new, everyone you have is an A player. And especially if you're a small and scrappy team, you cannot handle any mediocrity on the team in terms of quality. And then the number 2 piece is creating systems. And this is all also in a newer way where we're starting to help teams. It's like, what are the systems that we can create so that if you have an A player that is, potential 10x rep, but she's only selling 30% of the time, you're losing 2/3 of her potential. So the first idea again is like, we need to get her or him to be the 10x rep in terms of skill set. And then we need to ensure that that productivity is happening as frequently as possible, right? And so that does not necessarily mean that they need to be crushing 16-hour days, but if the average workday is, for a rep, let's say is probably 10 hours, and they spend 3 of those hours selling, how can we creep that up to 4, 5, 6, 7 hours of selling? And maybe it's only an 8-hour day, and the last hour is, some of the admin that they're not able to outsource or delegate through AI. That is the key to me. So how do you enable your team, your reps, your SDRs, your frontline leaders to be better, and how do you equip them with the right tools to do more? So to me, I left the CRO Summit feeling very inspired. There were other sessions, there were great dinners, there were round tables. I had a lot of great chats with folks, met a lot of great people, did a run club with Sam Jacobs and a handful of other people that morning, was able to see a great customer from Panadoc the next day and grab some lunch. So that was excellent. But to me, what I'm leaving with is, how do I bring this to my own organization, my own, as the salesperson here, my own process, to the other teammates that we have, to their process, even if it's not in sales? And then how do we bring this to other organizations and help them achieve, really like what a 10x potential could be as a seller, in terms of their skill set, in terms of their AI. So I would love to hear any feedback on this. I know we typically do interviews. I wanted to give you the breakdown of what I saw from the summit. I'd love to hear your questions, your feedback, your thoughts. If you're interested in learning about what a 10x rep might look like, both in terms of their skill development and in terms of their systems, that is something that we're working with teams on today. So you can feel free to, respond to this wherever. You can come to our site at tasales.co. You can email me. It's tom@tasales.co. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. Would love to have a conversation. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed the pod. We'll be back next week with another interview. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for checking out that episode. 2 quick things as a takeaway. Number 1, we would feel honored if you left a review wherever you're listening to this podcast, if it's on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, to just let us know how we're doing, what else you'd like to see. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at tasales.co. Love to hear from you there. Much love. Have a great week.